The plasma conduit housing trembled in Tom Harrison's calloused hands. 12.73 millimeters. 0.03 over spec, but still within tolerance. In his 30 years at Toyota, he'd have flagged it for rework. Not because it would fail, but because precision mattered. Now, staring at the alien weapon component under Martian industrial lighting, Tom faced a different choice entirely. Report it as defective, and watch another rifle work perfectly when it killed human soldiers. Or pass it through and hope the infinitesimal stress fracture he'd introduced would cause catastrophic failure at the critical instant. The Hegemony's countdown clock on the far wall showed 71 hours, 14 minutes until Operation Final Harvest launched, 71 hours until their fleet departed to finish what they'd started at Earth. Tom logged the measurement as 12.69, within spec, and set the component aside. Unit 184. Came the synthesized voice of Production Overseer Kent. The 7-foot bureaucrat materialized beside Tom's inspection station like a nightmare crossed with a clipboard, constantly adjusting his holographic displays in perfect geometric patterns. Efficiency metrics show nominal performance. Your productivity parameters remain optimally calibrated. Copy that, Tom replied, not looking up from his tablet. Through the reinforced windows, Martian dust devils danced across the red wasteland, where his hometown of Detroit used to export hope. Now Detroit was ash, and Tom Harrison was prisoner 184 in the Hegemony's weapons factory, building the instruments of humanity's extinction. The irony wasn't lost on him. The facility stretched for kilometers underground, a converted mining complex that now churned out death with assembly line precision. 3 production lines: infantry plasma rifles on line A, heavy support cannons on line B, and ship-mounted defense arrays on line C. Each weapon bore Tom's quality assurance signature before shipping to Hegemony forces across the galaxy. What they didn't know was that Tom Harrison had been turning quality control into warfare, one measurement at a time. "Morning, Tom." Janet Vasquez shuffled past, her maintenance coveralls bearing prisoner ID 247. She unconsciously tapped the reinforced wall with her knuckles, checking structural integrity out of pure habit. Former Boeing quality engineer, now officially a production unit. The woman who'd once ensured aircraft stayed in the sky, now helped build weapons to knock human ships out of it. A bent paperclip from her old cubicle gleamed on her collar, the only piece of home she'd managed to keep. "Janet? Sleep well?" "Like the dead." She paused, studying his face with an engineer's eye for stress fractures. "Heard about the timeline acceleration. 70 hours. My daughter would be graduating high school next month. If there was still a high school, still a." She caught herself. Numbers just hit different now. Tom understood. Time used to mean production schedules. Now it meant last chances. He began his morning route, Line A, where robotic arms assembled rifle components with mechanical precision. Line B, where heavier weapons took shape under alien supervision. Line C, where the ship killers that could crack Earth's remaining defenses rolled off the production line. At each station, Tom performed the same ritual he'd perfected over 3 decades. Dimensional tolerances, power, coupling integrity, thermal regulation systems. The difference was in what he reported versus what he saw. A rifle barrel, specified thermal coefficient over tolerance by 3 millionths, but logged it as normal, close enough to pass initial testing, wrong enough to fail when the metal expanded under sustained fire. A cannon's power coupling, thread pitch with an acceptable variance. But Tom had spent his break time loosening it just enough to create harmonic resonance at specific frequencies, the kind of frequencies generated by Hegemony targeting computers. Each lie was minute. Each lie was perfect. Each lie was revenge, served at room temperature with a specification limit of plus or minus nothing. Tom. Marcus Webb's voice carried across the testing bay, his fingers unconsciously drumming against his workstation in the rhythm of metal fatigue frequencies, a nervous habit he'd developed since Earth fell. Former Ford metallurgist, now the facility's stress analysis specialist, his wedding ring showed worn stress marks from nervous twisting. Got those failure mode reports you wanted? Tom crossed to Marcus's station, where alloy samples sat in various stages of destruction. Marcus was one of the few who really knew, what Tom was doing. Interesting patterns, Marcus said, aware of the audio pickups. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood materials science down to the molecular level. Metal fatigue showing up sooner than predicted. These stress patterns remind me of the 8 bridge collapse back home. Metal fatigue, they said, but I knew better. It was the small compromises, accumulated over time. Tom studied the data. Marcus had been introducing stress concentrators so small they were invisible to standard inspection, but which would propagate into critical failures under combat conditions. Atomic-level suicide pills hidden in the alien arsenal. Atmospheric pressure variations. Tom said for the monitors. Mars environment affecting material properties. Marcus nodded, but his eyes said something else. The network is ready. That night in his quarters, a converted storage closet that smelled of industrial lubricants and recycled air, Tom spread his stolen schematics across the fold-down table. Using skills learned from diagnosing automotive assembly lines, he'd mapped every critical failure point in the Hegemony weapon systems. The plasma rifles had 17 points where imperceptible defects could cascade into total failure. The cannons had 12. The ship-mounted arrays had 23, including a beautifully vulnerable thermal regulation system that would catastrophically overload after exactly 127 seconds of continuous operation. Tom studied his masterpiece on the tablet screen, a web of connected failures. Touch this stress point, and that power coupling fails. Weaken this alloy, and the whole firing system cascades into destruction. 30 years of finding problems had taught him exactly where to create them, like pulling one card from a house of cards. A symphony of mechanical failure, composed in manufacturing tolerances. A soft knock interrupted his planning. Sarah Kim from Final Assembly slipped inside, her tools arranged in perfect geometric patterns on her belt, a habit that kept her sane in chaos. Her face was tight with controlled fear, and Tom noticed she'd scratched her prisoner number over her old employee ID badge. "They're asking questions," she whispered. "Vorthak pulled production records going back 6 months. He's looking for patterns." Tom's chest tightened. Senior Quality Administrator Vorthak, 8 feet of bureaucratic precision, who treated inefficiency like a personal insult and rearranged objects during conversations to achieve perfect symmetry. If he was investigating, what kind of patterns? Rejection rates, rework orders, component failures. Tom, if he figures out what we've been doing. Sarah's hands moved unconsciously, checking each tool's position. First, this gets discovered, then that person disappears, then everything falls apart. Tom thought of the detention levels, where humans who asked too many questions vanished, where Marcus Webb might already be answering very specific questions about stress analysis software. How long do we have? Vorthak scheduled a full quality audit for tomorrow morning. He's bringing in external inspectors. 70 hours until the offensive. 12 hours until their sabotage was potentially discovered. That's all they had. Tom felt the walls of possibility closing in like a precision-tooled vice. Sarah, we accelerate everything. Tonight. The next morning brought Vorthak and his audit team like a plague of accountants. Tom watched from his inspection station as the aliens swarmed over production records, pulling random samples, cross-referencing rejection patterns with component serial numbers. Vorthak moved through the facility like a perfectionist's nightmare, adjusting displays and straightening equipment with his secondary arms, while his primary hands manipulated data streams. Unit 184, Vorthak's synthesized voice cut through the factory noise. Your compliance metrics indicate 97.3% accuracy over the previous quarter. This statistical anomaly requires clarification. Report to Testing Bay 7. Immediate compliance required. Tom's hands didn't shake as he gathered his tools. 30 years of quality control had taught him that panic was just another defect to be eliminated. He walked to Bay 7 with the steady pace of a man who'd spent his life finding problems and fixing them. 3 plasma rifles lay on the testing bench. all weapons he'd personally sabotaged in the past week. Standard testing might miss his sub-millimeter modifications, but if the aliens conducted manual thermal stress analysis, Hegemony engineer Krex supervised the testing personally, his 4 arms manipulating instruments with mechanical precision, while one hand constantly fidgeted with a geometric puzzle. Impossible, he muttered at the data streams. The mathematics should forbid variance at this level. Tom watched as the rifles underwent standard performance trials. Power output, 847 kilowatts, within nominal range. Targeting, accuracy, 0.3 milliradians, exceeding specifications. Thermal regulation, stable at operational temperatures. But Tom knew these weapons would fail catastrophically after approximately 200 sustained firing cycles, far beyond standard testing but well within combat usage. The aliens tested for immediate functionality, not battlefield reliability. It was a blindness that would cost them everything. Acceptable performance across all parameters, Krex announced, all 4 arms gesturing in frustration at data that refused to make sense. Quality metrics within established tolerances. Tom nodded, hiding his relief behind the mask of professional competence he'd worn for decades. Glad to hear it. Always aim for 0 defects. As the audit team moved to other stations, Tom felt the weight of 70 hours settling on his shoulders. Everything depended on whether 8 months of patient sabotage would manifest when it mattered most. The first reports came 68 hours later. Tom was inspecting cannon assemblies when alerts began flashing across the facility's communication systems. Operation Final Harvest had commenced. The Hegemony's most powerful fleet, equipped with weapons bearing his quality assurance signature, was engaging Earth's final defense line at Lunar Station. Initial reports were devastating. Hegemony forces overwhelming human positions, superior firepower crushing desperate resistance. Tom's hands trembled as he read casualty estimates that climbed into the millions. His throat constricted. His vision blurred at the edges. Maybe his sabotage hadn't worked. Maybe 8 months of hairline rebellion would amount to nothing more than a quality control manager's delusion of relevance. Then, everything changed. Multiple weapon malfunctions reported, announced the facility's communication system. Fleet Command requesting immediate technical analysis. Tom's tablet began flooding with failure reports. Plasma rifles shutting down during extended firefights. Heavy cannons experiencing catastrophic power coupling failures. Ship-mounted defense arrays overheating and exploding. Within 6 hours, the pattern became undeniable. The Hegemony's superior weapons were failing at a rate of 67% under combat conditions. Not immediately, that would have been too obvious, but after sustained use, when Earth's defenders were pressing their attacks, when every shot mattered, Tom watched his life's work unfold in real-time battle reports. A rifle exploding in an alien soldier's hands after exactly 198 firing cycles. A cannon's harmonic resonance system tearing itself apart when targeting computers reached specific frequencies. A flagship's defense array failing after 127 seconds of continuous operation, leaving the vessel defenseless against human torpedo salvos. Each failure was barely detectable until it mattered. Each failure was 30 years of automotive quality control turned into an art form of controlled destruction. Each failure was precision rebellion measured to atomic tolerances. Unit 184. Kent materialized beside Tom's station, flanked by security guards whose translator boxes rendered their threats in calm, professional English. His holographic displays flickered with agitation. Production irregularities have been detected in weapons bearing your quality certification. Your output parameters now indicate systematic variance. Tom looked up from his tablet, where Hegemony forces were retreating in complete disarray as their weapons systematically failed. Earth's primitive human defenders, equipped with reliable if less advanced weapons, were achieving the impossible, total victory. Must be a materials issue, Tom said, his voice steady as a micrometer reading. I only inspect what comes off the production line. These failures are too systematic for random occurrence, Kent stated, his secondary arms adjusting displays with increasing urgency. Analysis suggests deliberate sabotage. Your emotional parameters require immediate recalibration. Tom shrugged with the casual indifference of a man who'd spent 3 decades finding problems others missed. I spent 30 years making sure cars didn't fall apart, taught me to spot patterns others miss. He paused, watching another failure cascade ripple through the alien fleet. Difference is, I knew those cars were supposed to work. The guards moved closer, but Tom felt no fear. On his tablet, the flagship of the fleet attacking Earth, the ship carrying the defense array he'd personally sabotaged, was listing helplessly as human fighters swarmed around its dead weapons. You will explain these anomalies? Kent demanded. Happy to, Tom replied. See, the thing about quality control is that it's all about understanding systems. Every component affects every other component. Change one variable, and you get cascade effects throughout the entire assembly. He gestured at his tablet, where the battle reports showed Hegemony forces in complete collapse. Problem with your weapons wasn't the individual parts. Problem was assuming that precision manufacturing is just about following specifications. But real quality control, the kind I learned building cars for people who needed them to start every morning for 20 years, that's about understanding what specifications really mean. Tom stood slowly, setting down his micrometer with the care of a craftsman laying down tools at the end of a long day. Your specs called for components that would pass factory testing. My specs called for components that would fail during peak stress. Turns out, both sets of requirements were technically achievable. The facility's communication system crackled with the final report. Hegemony Fleet Command ordering full retreat. Operation Final Harvest had become the worst military disaster in their recorded history. Ships defenseless when their weapons failed. Ground forces overwhelmed when their rifles stopped working mid-battle. Humanity's inferior forces had achieved total victory through superior reliability. Tom was transferred to detention that afternoon, but not before learning the full scope of their success. Marcus Webb was released after investigators found no evidence of sabotage. The aliens still couldn't believe that manufacturing defects could be introduced so systematically without obvious traces. In detention, Tom learned his lessons were spreading. Quality engineers on 12 worlds were suddenly developing very specific blind spots. Janet's structural integrity techniques, Marcus's stress analysis modifications, Sarah's assembly protocols that ensured sabotaged weapons reached critical targets. The network Tom had built wasn't just saboteurs, they were teachers. And the lessons of precision rebellion were spreading across the galaxy like a virus written in engineering specifications. The sound of the production lines outside his cell had changed. Still manufacturing weapons, but now every component carried the patient virus of human precision. Each machine hummed with the rhythm of controlled failure, a countdown not to humanity's destruction, but to the moment when the enemy's weapons would discover the difference between testing perfectly and working reliably. Tom Harrison had spent his career building things that lasted. His final project was building things that failed exactly when they mattered most. As he closed eyes and listened to the familiar drumbeat of the machines, Tom smiled. He'd learned something profound in his detention cell. Sometimes the most precise measurement isn't about making things work. Sometimes it's about making sure they don't. And that difference, measured to a tolerance of plus or minus nothing, would be enough.